Hello, and welcome to 5-Minute Math. For today's number talk, we are looking at the fraction 3/17, trying to decide mentally whether it's closer to 0, 1/2, or 1. So when I'm looking at this fraction, I know that if I want to compare fractions, probably the easiest way to do that would be to make everything have the same denominator. And so since we're dealing with the 17ths, let's make everything into 17ths. So how can we do that? Well, 0 is pretty simple. You could just put any denominator underneath 0, and it's equal to 0. 0/17, 0/10, 0/5, it doesn't matter. There's no parts taken. As long as your numerator is 0, it's equal to 0, regardless of the denominator. The 1 whole, we still need the denominator to be 17, but 1 whole means every part is taken, which means you just match whatever your denominator is, that needs to be your numerator. So in this case, it needs to be 17/17. That equals 1 whole. Could be 8/8, 10/10, 100 100ths, whatever. So if I have this midpoint here, I've got 17. I need to figure out, okay, what's halfway in between 0 and 17, or what's half of 17? Well, since that's an odd number, that's going to be difficult. But let's look at it this way. If I were to have the even fraction on either side, okay, so what's half of 16? That's going to be 8. Half of 18, that's going to be 9. So it's in between 8 and 9. It's not going to be a whole number, but we can put a decimal there, 8.5 or 8.5. So 8.5, 8 and 5/10 is the same as 8.5. That is equal to my 1/2. All right, so now we can evaluate my 3/17. All right, my 3/17 is way down here somewhere. 3/17. I know it's not going to be closer to 1. I just kind of eyeballed it, and I just guessed it's kind of right where it is, which means it's leaning closer to 0, but how can I be sure? Well, if we want to be technically sure, we know it's not closer to 1, but it could be closer to 0 or 1/2. It's between those two. Now what we need to do is we need to cut our half in half. And that's a pretty simple trick here. Think about if I've got a square here and I've got a half. If I cut my each half in half, what do I get? I get fourths. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw halves here. And I'm going to say, all right, so that half of a half is going to be 1/4. Right? My 1/2 can also be rewritten as 2/4. I can put 1 right there if I need to. I'm not really looking at that side of it. That's 3/4, and that's 4/4. Remember, any fraction with the same numerator or denominator. All right, so the way I drew it, it looks like 3/17 is closer to 0/17 because it's on the left side of the 1/4, but that was just my drawing. So how can we know? Well, let's take this 8.5 over 17, and let's cut that in half. Okay, so if I can find half of 8.5, all right, so there's a few different ways I can do that, right? I can divide by 2, or what I can do here is I can say, all right, so what is 2 goes into 8, all right, that's going to be 4 times. And then I can just kind of reason, what's going to be half of 0.5? Well, that's going to be difficult, but what if I said 0.50? Oh, okay, so that's going to be 0.25. So half of 8.5 is going to be 4.25. Now, it is strange to have a decimal in the numerator, but this is us getting technical. So now I get to compare 4.25 over 17, 3, and if I really want to, you can, add decimals to go to the hundredths place, right? 3.00 over 17. That 3 is definitely less than the 4.25, which means it does fit right here between 0 and my 1/4. And if it's less than 1/4, that means it is going to be closest to 0.